Who is it? It is a story about a high school girl who secretly falls in love with a senior at the same school. One day, she decides to invite that senior out, a woman with pale skin sitting on the opposite platform. She wondered how long the woman had been sitting there, and why she hadn't noticed her before. She couldn't read the woman's expression, but it seemed like the woman was staring at her. Suddenly, the woman stood up slowly, and began to walk closer to the train tracks. Just then, a train rushed by, making her worry about the woman's safety. However, when the train passed, the woman had disappeared. She tried to scan the platform for the woman, but couldn't find her. Suddenly, a hand came from behind and covered her eyes. Then a voice asked her, "Who is it?" It was her senior's voice. At that moment, she began to worry that he might feel her heart racing through his hands. She quickly cut in and said that the question she asked earlier was. As she tried to gather the courage to say it, his hands pressed harder against her face, causing her pain. She cried out for him to remove his hands, but he didn't stop, and she couldn't shake her face free from his strong grip. The senior asked again, "Who is it?" She hurriedly replied, "It's you, of course." But for some reason, questions began to arise in her mind about who her senior really was. He was the captain of the basketball team after all. They had gone to the amusement park together, and he was the one covering her eyes right now. She looked through the gaps between his fingers and saw a train passing by. Suddenly, her senior's face and voice faded away, along with the warmth of his hands. It turned out that she was sitting there covering her own eyes and said, "So who is it?" before she disappeared into the crowd passing by. Wanting everyone in the world to like us is like wanting the ground to be perfectly flat. The sound of footsteps. This is the story of a man who goes shopping at a mall with his wife, who insists he join her, despite his rare day off, making him reluctant to accompany her. When she asks for his opinion on what she is about to buy, he shows little interest and responds vaguely, because he knows that sharing his thoughts will lead to a lengthy discussion. He tries to change the subject. After a while, he receives an email from a co-worker inviting him out for drinks, so he tells his wife he needs to use the restroom for a moment. In the dimly lit restroom, some lights are out. He checks his phone again and finds a second email from the same friend asking what time he can come. He realizes he has been shopping with his wife for a long time and wonders what time he can meet his friend. While he was deep in thought, he noticed a stain on the right sleeve that seemed to be black ink. He then realized that the walls of the restroom were covered with strange characters written in black ink. A feeling of fear arose within him because of those characters. So he reached out to touch them, only to find that the black ink seemed to fade away easily, as if it had just been written or created. In the silence, suddenly an email notification sound startled him, making him feel embarrassed immediately. The email was from his wife, asking which floor of the restroom he was in. At the same time, he heard footsteps of someone entering the restroom, the sound resembling someone walking back and forth. The shadows that came in seemed to match that. After a while, another person entered the restroom and walked around just like the first one, making him wonder if they were patrolling. As the young man focused intently on listening to the sounds outside, almost forgetting to breathe, suddenly more people began to enter, and the footsteps started to sound like a troop of soldiers marching around. The sound of footsteps grew louder and louder, echoing against the walls as if an earthquake was happening, causing him to feel uneasy and confused about the situation. Suddenly, he received a call from his wife, and as his phone vibrated, the footsteps outside went silent immediately, and the characters on the wall began to fade away, as if something or someone realized he was inside. In the silence, he felt uncertain about what to do, and suddenly a large number of people stood around the restroom door. Noticing the shoes surrounding him, he felt that something was watching him from somewhere. When he looked up at the top of the restroom door, he encountered the owners of all those footsteps staring at him. Cassette tape. This is the story of a man who has just returned to his hometown, after many years, because his friend is getting married, so he came home early. That evening, everyone had dinner together. After dinner, he went into his room, which remained unchanged as if time had stopped in that room. He sat at the same table and took out items from his memories one by one. While looking at his yearbook, he could hardly believe that his friend was about to get married. Then he stumbled upon a cassette tape in a drawer, which had a label that read, "What Happened Today?" This made him feel familiar with that tape. He decided to play it and heard his own voice from when he was a child, even though he had forgotten about it now. It seemed that his younger self used to record daily life stories on cassette tapes like this every day. He sat listening to it continuously, and his memories gradually returned. Then, there was a story about Tanabes, his friend who was getting married, which he recounted, surprising him greatly. As he continued listening, there were some recordings that made him feel unfamiliar, wondering if he had done or experienced such things. The date of the tape recordings got closer to the present, and the events recorded became increasingly strange. He became quite sure that he had never done or recorded any of these things, and he couldn't even grasp the content of what he had recorded. Then he was shocked by what he heard when the daily recording began to speak in his working-age voice, which he was certain he had not recorded, thinking to himself, "What is this? It makes no sense." At the same time, he thought to stop, but he continued to listen. Finally, the recording of the next day's events began, stating that after he greeted Tanabe in the afternoon, he heard laughter that sounded like it came from a music box shaking. It was as if an old man was picking up a stick and turning that old man into a broken music box, ending with a recorded voice saying that the wedding tomorrow would surely be quite exciting. He was so startled that he pulled the headphone jack out, thinking that this cassette tape must be a haunted tape for sure. Grinding teeth when sleeping. This is the story of a young woman named Niwako, who went on a trip with her close friend from work. They did not have a clear plan for this trip, so they wandered around, stopping to take photos at interesting spots, even though they were unaware of the history of each place they visited. The last location they explored before returning to the hotel was a cave that housed a statue of the deity Jizo. According to Japanese belief, Jizo is the protector of travelers. Her friend asked if they could enter the cave, but Niwako crawled in without concern, as there were no signs indicating a 5-meter limit. In reality, even locals are hesitant to enter this place. After thoroughly exploring, they decided to head back to the hotel. However, the claim of no 5-meter sign seemed to be incorrect, as the footage showed that the two had walked out from a step that was flush with the ground, which they did not notice. Additionally, the statue of Jizo had one tooth tied with a red thread, as if to bind something. After the two returned to the hotel, they collapsed onto the bed, exhausted from their day of wandering. Suddenly, her friend turned on the light and said that Niwako was grinding her teeth loudly in her sleep. When Niwako woke up in anger, she suddenly felt a sharp toothache. Even though she took painkillers, they did not alleviate her pain at all. She then tried to find a local dentist, and eventually came across a clinic that was still open. She called a taxi, and hurried there immediately. Upon arrival, she found the dental clinic to be very old and uninviting, but the pain was enough to compel her to go inside. An older female dentist led her to a dimly lit treatment room, which had an unsettling atmosphere. As Niwako opened her mouth, She noticed that the dentist's gaze while examining her mouth seemed rather vague, and the dentist did not say anything until Niwako asked if it looked that bad. The dentist's expression immediately turned serious, as she instructed her two assistants not to let her escape. One of the assistants asked if the doctor couldn't help, but the doctor did not respond, and turned to Niwako, saying that she needed to extract the tooth. When Niwako thought about having her tooth pulled in such an old dental clinic, she refused and was about to get up and leave. However, the two assistants quickly came over to hold her down, preventing her from getting up, while the doctor attempted to use a tool to extract her tooth. Suddenly, a pain like being burned by fire shot through her molar. Niwako struggled with all her might until she broke free and ran out, hearing the doctor shouting after her, trying to stop her. It seemed he was saying something about the bad consequences that would follow if he let her go like that. But she ignored him and quickly called a taxi to return to the hotel. When she returned, she hurried to the mirror to check the molar that was almost extracted. Suddenly, the painful molar fell out and dropped to the floor. She noticed that the molar had the face of someone in agony, and the bloodstains on the floor made it look even more terrifying, as if it was expressing pain. At that moment, she recalled the dentist's warning, particularly a phrase that said it would come for her. Suddenly, the molar disappeared from the floor, but she could still see a trail of blood leading to her friend's bedroom, accompanied by strange sounds coming from there. She followed the blood trail and noticed that the molar seemed to have gone to her friend. Choose to befriend smart problem solvers and avoid those good at making excuses. Spirit Calling Game. This is the story of a group of middle school girls consisting of Huka, Yukari, and Miku, who decided to play a popular game at school one night. The game they are going to play is said to allow communication with the dead. Hence it is called a spirit calling game. In the first step, players must tie a red thread to a razor blade soaked in water overnight. Then, one person swallows a paper with the name of a deceased person written on it, and the dead will appear to communicate. There are rumors of a student from another school who tried this game and ended up losing their sanity, eventually being hospitalized as a mental patient. Yukari suggests they start playing the game and asks whose name they should write down. Huka then speaks up, questioning if they are really going to play this game, not out of fear or belief in the rumors, but because she feels something is wrong about playing it. Yukari then said, "We agreed on this, so why complain now?" and suggested writing Nakayama's name. The other two girls looked shocked and asked, "Do you mean Teacher Nakayama?" Teacher Nakayama was a young teacher who used to teach in their homeroom. He was very interested in horror and even taught them how to play this spirit calling game. However, 3 months ago, he mysteriously disappeared. The only thing left was a broken glass at the back of the classroom, along with rumors that he had died. However, they still did not know if Teacher Nakayama was really dead, or if this method would actually allow them to talk to the dead. At that moment, Yukari had already written Teacher Nakayama's name on the paper and checked that they had done it 49 times. The three girls then played rock, paper, scissors, and the last one to lose was Monoka, who had to swallow the paper bird and the water in the glass. She held her breath and gathered her courage to swallow it all at once, feeling like something was stuck in her throat, while her friends laughed and wondered if Teacher Nakayama had come to this room yet, watching her suffer. However, as the paper bird was stuck in her throat, Yuka began to feel strange, and her expression changed, causing her friends to worry and ask if she was okay. Yukari thought she was truly choking, and after Huka coughed heavily for a while, she finally spat something out, which was the paper bird she had just swallowed. But the name written on the paper, which was Teacher Nakayama, had now changed to Huka's name. The two girls were surprised and shocked by what had happened. Yukari insisted that she was sure she had written teacher Nakayama's name. After a while, the two girls heard a loud voice from behind asking, "So, what are we going to talk about?" White line. This is the story of a young teacher who had to stay to grade students' exams until dusk. After finishing the grading, she caught a glimpse of someone standing in the schoolyard. Upon seeing the uniform, she immediately recognized it was a student, but she wondered what they were still doing there so late. She squinted to see better, and noticed the student was drawing a white line with a chalk line marker. She decided to go out and warn them not to stay at school until it was dark. However, when she stepped outside, the student had already vanished, leaving only the white line that continued into the classroom building. She followed the white line, which led her further into the building, stretching on endlessly. At that moment, the school was empty, and all she could hear was the sound of the chalk line marker. Then after a while, she heard the sound of the rooftop door opening. The white line led her up the stairs step by step, but the higher she went, the more uncomfortable she felt. She followed the line to a closed door leading to the rooftop, even though her instincts told her not to open it. However, she had to open it to warn that student. But when she opened the door, the student was no longer there. All she saw was the white line stretching out. She wondered what it was, and walked to the end of the building's balcony. Looking down, she saw only white shock marks that seemed as if someone had been thrown down to the ground below. She paused for a moment, thinking about where that student had gone. As she was about to turn back, she noticed that the white line stretching to her feet had turned black, as if it was burning closer to her. Soon after, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs to the rooftop. The footsteps did not belong to just one person, but seemed to be a group. She shouted, "Who is it? Don't come in." Suddenly the door opened. Then she encountered the shadows of those ghosts or spirits that were lining up to come in, and she realized that the white line being dragged was to guide them to this rooftop. The last image she saw was that student standing behind the door, and in shock or whatever it was, her body fell down below, along with other spirits. Perhaps that student could be the guide for the spirits of those who committed suicide in this school. Snow Hut. It is the story of a boy named Masayuki who visits his grandparents during the winter break. He doesn't often get the chance to play in the snow, so when he arrives, he enjoys playing in the snow with his cousins outside. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere grew cold for both of them. They helped each other build a snow hut to shelter from the cold wind and to warm up. They gradually piled the snow higher and higher until they finally succeeded in building a snow hut. It wasn't very big, but it was just right for both of them, and the inside was warmer than they expected. It made them feel like they had created a secret base, which brought them great joy. The cousin asked Masayuki if he was hungry, and he replied that he was. The cousin then said he would go get the mochi grill to roast some inside, and told Masayuki to wait there. While waiting for his cousin to bring the mochi grill, Masayuki felt cold and looked out at the snow-covered forest outside. He noticed another snow hut that was the same size as his. He walked over to explore it, but was surprised to find that the hut had no entrance. Additionally, something was shining inside like a flickering candle, appearing almost magical amidst the surrounding darkness. Out of curiosity, Masayuki gently knocked on the hut from the outside, and heard a response from inside, wanting to know what was inside. He then brought a stick to lean against the wall of the hut to look inside. When Masayuki peered in, he saw only a single lit candle. However, the inside revealed marks on the wall that looked like someone had been trying to dig out. Masayuki asked if anyone was inside, and suddenly, a pair of eyes shone from within, saying, "Now it's your turn." After that sentence, Masayuki seemed to go into shock and fell backward, while the snow hut in front of him collapsed as well. At that moment, his cousin came in and quickly carried him back home. When Masayuki regained consciousness, he found himself lying on a futon in his grandparents' house. He couldn't remember anything, but from the expressions of his parents and grandparents, he felt that something bad had happened. The family was discussing how to fix something, but he couldn't quite understand their sentences until everyone opened the door with smiling faces, appearing kinder than usual. However, this only made him feel that something terrible was about to happen. He noticed a newly built hut behind the house and eyes staring at him, saying, "It's your turn now." This implied that he had accidentally released a malevolent spirit that had been trapped. The family believed that Masayuki was possessed by a ghost, so they planned to perform a ritual like before, to confine the evil spirit in the snow hut again, unaware that the evil spirit was no longer residing in Masayuki. Underground passage. This is the story of a university student who is walking home after a social gathering. While he is on his way back to the station, he suddenly remembers that he forgot something at the bar. He thinks about turning back to get it, but then it starts to rain. The young man decides to take shelter from the rain for a while, but it seems the rain won't stop easily. He then gives up on his intention and thinks about going home first, planning to come back for his belongings another day. He walks down to the underground passage to reach the train station. As he descends, he feels puzzled about when this underground passage was here, as it appears quiet and cold, and the path ahead is very dark, making it hard for him to see the end. He wonders if this path really leads to the station. Despite his concerns, he decides to keep walking forward. However, the continuous curves of the path prevent him from seeing the end, no matter how far he walks. After a while, he notices a shadowy figure ahead, which makes him think about turning back. But as he gets closer, he encounters a worker who is standing and mumbling. It was only dark at first, repeating the same situation, and the worker didn't say anything else, but pointed to one of the walls. This made the young man see a side path, but it was narrower and darker than the path he had entered. The worker seemed to be trying to indicate that the young man should walk into that side path, but since it looked narrow and eerie, he decided to continue walking straight ahead. By walking past the worker and not taking the side path he indicated, the young man continued down the corridor towards the station, until he reached a dead end with a locked iron gate. This left him with no choice but to turn back, unaware of how far he had walked back. The young man kept walking, but still couldn't see the worker from earlier, and soon he began to breathe heavily. He also couldn't find the side path the worker had pointed out, leading him to wonder where it had gone. He looked at the wall in that area, complaining that it should be around here, and at the same time, he noticed the worker's footprints on the ground, which seemed to be going in circles. He realized that the side path must be around here, and as he looked at that wall, he encountered a path that seemed to have just been wrongly plastered. In the middle, a shadowy figure resembling a person appeared, trying to claw its way out. The figure slowly moved out, causing the young man to panic and run away while shouting for help from the outside. However, the path he had entered initially seemed to be blocked, and it appeared that there had never been an entrance from the start.